So we meet today as we continue our study of the 9 essential relations. These are the foundation of the new astrology, the science of relations. And in order to move forward, we need to understand and apply the concept of as above, so below. The 4th relation is that of soul personality. The causal body as the vehicle of the soul, and the integrated unity of the mental, astral, and etheric physical bodies. We might speculate about individuals who have become integrated personalities. Let's look at this brief video.
We must now look at the world through a new lens.
So having seen glimpses of a long life, 96 years, for Sir David Attenborough, not that we have to identify his rays, but I think he could be an example of personality integration, where the physical, emotional, and mental bodies are aligned and become useful in terms of impacting humanity in a positive way and even beyond humanity, a global impact. So we're going to look at this on a much higher level. And if you have difficulty making these correspondences, don't worry, because it's very difficult to make these huge leaps from how we usually look at them in terms of an immediate relationship with an individual or our relationship with a group. But let's keep in mind that the aura of any form of life can be defined as the quality of a sphere of radiatory activity. The aura is usually spoken of in terms of color and of light due to the nature of the vision of the one who sees and the apparatus of response which is in use. 2 words only describe an aura from the point of view of occult knowledge, and they are quality and sphere of influence. And that is why I chose that example of Sir David, because that little video gives you a great sense of the quality of his life and his sphere of influence. What the clairvoyant really contacts is an impression which the mind rapidly translates into the symbology of color, whereas there is no color present. Seeing an aura, as it is called, is in reality a state of awareness that the seer may in all sincerity believe that he has registered a color, a series of colors or light, is entirely true in many cases. But what he really records is the quality of the sphere of radiatory activity. This he does when his own individual sphere of radiatory activity is of the same nature and quality as that contacted. So this presents us a particular challenge in looking at nations. And it is why it is always good to have those who are actually part of a nation to be in the group analyzing a nation, because they have a sense of the quality of the sphere of radiatory activity within which they live and move and have their being. And it's also good to have those who are allies of that nation, and also good to have those who are neutral in relation to that nation. So let's keep this in mind as we move forward together. And also the levels of uniqueness. The atom, the cell, the body, the group, the community, the nation, the region, for example, of a continental area that DK calls America, the region is Central America, a continent itself, or the whole globe. And there are these levels of uniqueness, and depending on what our rheology is, and depending on our relationship to that nation, we will discern the rheology and the quality in a very unique way that we can add to the group analysis. Andrea, would you read this slide for us, please?
Yes. It is the harmlessness that springs from true understanding and control of the personality by the soul that leads inevitably to spiritual expression in everyday life. It emanates from a capacity to enter into the consciousness and to penetrate into the realization of one's brother. And when this has been accomplished, all is lost sight of in the desire to ease and to help. The healing energy of the spiritual hierarchy cannot flow through the group if there is disharmony and criticism. The first work, therefore, of any group of healers is to establish themselves in love and to work towards group unity and understanding. The need for patience as a healing group, for any group for that matter, integrates and we always blend. It takes a little time for people to learn to work together in perfect understanding and in personality, and at the same time to achieve during their work a one-pointedness which will produce the needed rhythm, a rhythm of such unity and intensity that the work can synchronize internally. Aspirants and students, as they work along these lines, must train themselves to think as a group and to give to the group without a niggardly or reticent spirit, the best that is in them, and also the fruit of their meditation upon these matters.
Let's absorb this, because it gives us a very serious question in relation to our nations. Our nations. Is the soul of that nation able to express spiritual values in everyday life? Does that nation have a consciousness and the capacity in that consciousness to penetrate into the realization of another nation? And when that occurs, can that nation lose sight of its own desire and only aid and help? So DK gives us, in a way, what we need to look for at any level, at individuals, at families, at groups, at local governmental agencies, at networks of agencies serving a need within a country or a nation or an area? Is there true control of the personality of that entity by the soul, leading to spiritual expression in everyday life? What then's required of any group seeking to aid hierarchy in the service of humanity? Heike, would you read this for us, please?
Love, wisdom, active intelligence, group unity, group understanding, harmlessness, self-forgetfulness, right application of ideals as transformative ideas, integration of these qualities, patience, and persistence. What needs to be added to this list? How do we hold ourselves accountable?
Let's take a moment to think of this in relation to the nation. We work to meditate, to develop soul consciousness in humanity and in nations. Which quality would you suggest needs to be meditated upon in relation to the nation you are holding in your consciousness? If you think of one, would you please put it in the chat box? First, the united auras of the group members ever determine the group condition, the group activity, usefulness, problem, and glamour. Hence emerges individual group responsibility and individual usefulness. DK says each of you either hinders or aids the group according to the auric condition, which is either in a state of glamour or illusion, or is kept relatively free from these conditions. We might suggest that our work on group glamour is a step towards working in group formation on a national glamour, or the glamour of a nation that is deeply, seriously limiting the nation's ability to move forward in terms of developing soul consciousness. Thank you, Aria. Non-judgment. Thank you. Group unity. Thank you. Right application of ideals to become the right application of ideas. True group understanding. Forgiveness. So let us together visualize the one soul, uniting the souls of all our group members, those working with us subjectively, and those joining us from the other side of the veil. In unison, we sound the protective formula while making the sign of the cross of divinity. Yvonne, will you sound the formula for us?
We touch the forehead and say, as the soul, we work in light. Chest, and darkness cannot touch us. Left eye, we take our stand within the light. Right eye, we work, and from that point, we never move. Let us pause briefly to affirm the purity of our motive as we aspire to greater understanding of Master DK's teachings and our intention to expand our conscious service under the law of love for the good, the true, the beautiful, with the guidance of the soul and protection of the higher lives focused in the heart of our group.
We've looked at this chart throughout our study of the new astrology and the science of relations. And let's go through it again. The human expression can and eventually will be negative to the soul. So in relation to nations, the human expression of the nation will be negative to the soul, revealing the higher mind. And it's interesting, whilst considering the pairs of opposites, the negative and positive factors, to study the following groupings. And we're going to use these as we move forward through a review of the physical, etheric, astral, emotional, and mental bodies as these would be integrated. We have in these groupings 3 fields of reflection. These groupings can also be worked out in many ways, and it must be borne in mind, as he and Blavatsky pointed out, any such groupings, such as the 7 principles, will vary according to the point in evolution of the investigator. So any of our investigations will necessarily be limited in the depth of our understanding, but it is a good exercise to work through. The first relation that we looked at, that of the physical etheric body, the natural affinity, where the point of balance is the emotional nature between the brain and the lower mind. That carries over to the second relation, which is that of the astral emotional body with the physical body, the etheric physical. And the field of balancing is the emotional nature. When the second tier is approached, we have the higher mind, which is positive, drawing, magnetizing, the lower mind, which is the negative field, in the third relation toward the soul, the point of balance, where brain and mind become in rapport, on rapport. So the nature of the nation that you are considering, is that nation still working with that first relation, that of natural affinity, that positive and negative relation on the physical plane? the magnetic attraction and repulsion played out in the emotional nature? Is the nation dealing with a second relation, that of the astral, emotional body, the field of glamour, working out through the physical etheric field with conflict, violence? How extensive is that across that nation? Or is the nation working on the third relation, that of mind and brain? The brain cells of all the human beings in that nation as the negative point, and the higher mind, the positive, magnetic, attractive brain cells of that nation, working out through the soul vehicle in reality? Or is that nation working truly on the fourth relation, where the spirit, the monad, is beginning to be the positive, magnetic, attractive point, and the personality is the negative, with the soul bringing in the balancing force? Something to consider. So as we continue today with the fourth relation, that of the soul personality, it's important to make the connection back to the second relation, because there is this 2-4-6 line that is true in looking at all rays and really in terms of any point of development. The relation between the astral body and the physical, for the majority, is the controlling factor. So the brain cells in any nation are likely related or polarized in the astral body, and having great influence on the negative automatic physical body, the instrument of desire. And it is swayed and controlled by desire. Desire for physical life and desire for the acquisition of the tangible, which we see in the tremendous focus on materiality in many parts of the world. And we look at this because so many human beings and groups and nations are still polarized in the astral emotional body. And we look at the glamours. And a close study of one's reactions, the national reactions, because it brings one to the consideration of that basic characteristic which cannot be overemphasized in view of the world's present conditions. Harmlessness. DK says, I tell you that the achieving of harmlessness in the positive sense, not in the negative, means the attainment of that step which leads definitely to the portal of initiation. When first mentioned, it sounds of small moment, and to bring the whole subject of initiation into such small account that it becomes unimportant. It's essential that we continue to achieve not only the attitude, but as Master DK says, the altitude of the observer. Martine, would you read this, the fourth relation, for us?
The relation between the soul and the personality, which is the problem, engrossing the attention of aspirants now. For they are the pioneers of the human family, the pathfinders into the world of the soul. With this relation, the mystics and the occultists concern themselves. The relation of the soul to the personality is developed primarily from the standpoint of meditation. It should be borne in mind that these rules of white magic are only for those whose personality is coordinated and whose minds are gradually being brought under control. The man, therefore, is utilizing the lower mind, the reasoning mind, while the soul is utilizing the higher or abstract mind. Both units are working with two aspects of the universal principle of mind, and on this ground, their relation becomes possible. The man's work with his mind is to render it negative and receptive to the soul, and this is positive occupation. Note the use here of the word positive in the attempt to make the mind receptive, for herein lies the clue to right action. The sole work in meditation is to make the point of that meditation so positive that the lower mind can be impressed, and so the lower man can be brought into line with the eternal plan.
This is probably the most important relation for us as a group to really consider in depth. And that's why we're going to take pieces or parts and really attempt to integrate this over the next 2 or 3 months. And I think we can see in the way he describes it in the paragraph that begins, "It should be borne in mind that these rules of white magic are only for those whose personality is coordinated and whose minds are gradually being brought under soul control," is something for each of us to consider seriously and to decide as individuals what work we need to do, and then work within our groups to achieve a greater relationship to the group mind in our meditative activities together. So as we approach this in relation to the nations, in looking at Switzerland and doing the research and analysis on that particular country, a mind that came to my attention in relation to the country is Hermann Hesse, who wrote in German, but was a native Swiss of Switzerland. And he wrote many books on the developing of spiritual consciousness, including Siddhartha, which in my particular upbringing in relation to spiritual activities had, in my case, a tremendous impact. So consider for yourself in relation to the nation that you are considering. And I would say, one of the nations that's been mentioned is Iran, that for many, Rumi, the mystic, who's written, his writings have carried over and had a tremendous impact. And a colleague of mine in the studies who was born in Iran and lived in Iran and escaped Iran and came to the United States. She was involved in a group of refugees, and they studied Rumi and other writings, Persian writings, in their spiritual studies. And she also participated in all of our esoteric studies, studying Master DK. So I see these relationships over the time I've been working in this field, where people are impressed in their country of origin by a particular spiritual mind and bring that forward into these teachings. So think about that as we move forward together and the impact of personality soul integration that our groups are bringing forward today. So we're about understanding and applying the concept of as above, so below, the relation between the soul and personality. First thing that we need to consider is the head center is awakened through meditation, service, and aspiration. And it is through this center that the soul makes its contact with the personality. So the nation you are considering, is there evidence in the head center of the nation that it has been or is awakening through meditation, service, and aspiration? What evidence comes to mind? What evidence does one need to find that you don't currently have? And we also need to keep in our minds the fact that we're moving from the 5th sub-race to the 6th sub-race of the 5th root race. So there's a sequential and unrolling sensitive activity that will result in divine understanding, possible and inevitable, with the development of the principle of mind and perfected intellect that is coming in this Aquarian age. So let's look at this chart again as we continue with the 4th relation. And because the head center is so vital, let us look at an interim, or potentially what we might call an interim phase, from the 3rd relation, lower mind, to higher mind, where the soul is in the process of becoming the point of balance. Let's consider the steps or stages in relation to a nation where the soul vehicle, the higher mind, is the true point of balance between the brain of a nation and the soul of the nation on the Buddhic plane. The higher mind of the nation as the point of balance. The knowledge petals, those vortices, have unfolded. What evidence is there in the expression of that nation that the knowledge petals have unfolded? What's the level of education of the national population? Are schools available? How many students have access? Do all have access to advanced educational opportunities? Is lifelong learning embedded in the consciousness of this nation? What advanced education is available? Are those groups with advanced education seen as lights, as beacons in all fields of endeavor? Are they part of the policy-making function of the government? Are those individuals and groups polarized in the mental body? Are they freeing themselves of glamour? Are they making right application of ideals to open the love petals of the Egoic Lotus? Heike, would you read this for us?
Correct relation between nations will result in the harmonizing and right adjustment of physical plane life. Correct response to one nation's environment will result in correct rapport with the soul aspect, hidden in every form, and will produce right relations between the various parts of the inner nervous structure to be found in every kingdom of nature, subhuman and superhuman. This is as yet practically unknown, but is rapidly coming into recognition. When it is proven and realized, it will be discovered that therein lies the basis of brotherhood and of unity. As the concrete manifestation of a national identity, and other parts in the body of the nation are separate in existence and in function, and yet are unified and brought into relation through the medium of the nervous system throughout the body of the nation. So will it be found that in the world such organisms as the kingdoms in nature have their separate life and functions, yet are correlated and coordinated by a vast intricate sensory system, which is sometimes called the soul of all things, the anima mundi, the underlying consciousness. Is there an anima mundi for a nation? Does that include the past lives or incarnations of the nation? What other questions should we consider?
As I went back and was considering Switzerland, I discovered that there had been changes from the time I first did an analysis, particularly of the governmental structure and what the major influences were, that the individuals who were from Switzerland at that time characterized it as a very, with a quality of equanimity, and there was a balance between and among the four major linguistic groups, cultural groups. And in current research that I was able to find, that had shifted, and there was now an imbalance in terms of the linguistic, cultural, and fear of an increasing imbalance because of the communication structure within the country shifting to social media and the results of that, changing the character of this nervous system, the body of the nation. So think about this question, and are there other questions that we should be asking? And I apologize to DK for abstracting to this point, but I believe it's important for us to think about these questions as we make these applications to greater entities. If you have a thought, please put it in the chat box. And in reviewing the slides, if you have a further thought, please share it with the group so that we can incorporate it in the final presentation. Martine.
Recognition is given today by thinkers to the factual nature of energy, and I'm using that word factual most advisedly. Energy is now regarded as all that is. Manifestation is the manifestation of a sea of energies, some of which are built into forms. Others constitute the medium in which those forms live and move and have their being. And still others are in process of animating both the forms and their environing substantial media. It must also be remembered that forms exist within forms. This is the basis of the symbolism.
So as we look at nations, even small nations like Switzerland, when you look at their governmental structure, there are over 2,000 communes in the governmental structure that have great power. And we'll look at that in detail. But consider this in relation to the nation, because this is levels and forms of energy expression. I had suggested to one esoteric group working with the United States, based on my own experience, that I knew that there was a way to reconnect those working on education reform, but it was not through the traditional mechanisms or what you would call energy units. It was not through the schools. It was through affinity groups across the different funding entities, governmental entities, higher educational entities, the principal association, all of these, where you could bring together those who were really functioning at that higher level, on the higher mental plane in relation to the concrete, the brain of the educational systems, to come up with really the right application of ideals in relation to the ideas that were being proposed, and in a national way. So there are ways to think about this in relation to your own nation and nation you are considering, finding out what these natural affinities are and how that can mobilize those on a much higher level of thinking who are truly bringing in a level of soul consciousness in relation to the national challenges. These forms exist within the forms. Catherine, would you read for this for us, please?
Therefore, let us first consider the brain of the nation. Aspirants and disciples represent those brain cells which are beginning to fall into the larger divine rhythm. They are learning the nature of responsiveness. The mass of men are like the millions of unused brain cells, which the psychologists and scientists tell us we possess but do not employ. The analogy you can think out in greater detail for yourself, But even superficially, it will be apparent to you that when this point is grasped, the purpose for which humanity exists, the objective before the group of world mystics and workers, and the ideal set before the individual aspirant are the same as in the individual meditation. The achieving of that focused attention and mental quiet wherein reality can be contacted, the true and the beautiful can be registered, divine purpose can be recorded, and it becomes possible to transmit to the phenomenal form upon the physical plane the needed energy whereby the subjective realization can be materialized. The aspirant does this in connection with his own soul purpose if he is successful in his endeavor. The disciple is learning to do this in relation to group purpose, and the initiate cooperates with the planetary purpose.
Let's go on.
Aspirants and disciples constitute the inner group of vitally alive brain cells in the planetary brain, the entire human group, and it is evident that the more powerful their united vibration and the clearer the light which they reflect and transmit, the more rapidly will be the present inert mass of human cells brought into activity. The occult hierarchy is to the planetary life what the light in the head is to the average awakened disciple, only on so much vaster a scale and with such an adequate inner alignment that students, such as those who read these instructions, cannot understand the true significance of the words. The point to be grasped is that through humanity on the physical plane, the nature of reality will be revealed. The true and the beautiful will be manifested. The divine plan will eventually work out, and that energy be transmitted to all forms in nature, which will enable the inner spiritual reality to emerge. And this is occurring within each nation, between nations, and among nations.
And I'll give you an example in my own experience of my observation of this. In the United States, for example, and in Canada, there are indigenous nations, vast in number. Years ago, when I was working to assist those trying to move advanced technology to the local level, it was brought to my attention by one of the aspirant's disciples in the technology field that there was already a vast network that had developed among all the tribal nations using technology to connect. And I was privileged to go to one state in the United States where 5 of these nations had come together and set up a technology system that was totally their own, using wireless technology that was not being used across the United States at the time. And today, that is an active communication network among all the tribes in the United States, bringing them together across all the issue areas, their educational opportunities. It's quite an advanced system that is not tapped in relation to most of what people call the national issues. So it's very interesting to know that those aspirants and disciples in all those areas brought together, and they have this vast way of accessing the nervous system of their particular cultural, linguistic, and social, educational, governmental network. It is happening, it is possible, and it can be done anywhere with pure intention and motivation that is unselfish and harmless. So we'll look at this periodically to remind us where we're working. We're working at the fifth subplane, and discrimination is the key. So let's consider the 3 tests in Scorpio that must be achieved in order to achieve an integrated personality that these nations are working to achieve. Martine, would you read all 3 of these as we move forward?
The 3 tests in Scorpio concern the 3 aspects of the human being as they fuse and blend upon the physical plane. They are, first of all, the test of appetite. This appetite is the natural predilections and tendencies which are inherent in the animal nature, and these are mainly 3: sex, which is natural affinity, physical comfort, and money as concretized energy. The lesson of appetite in a nation. Scorpio carries the test right down into the physical plane life, and then, when it is faced and handled there, the life of the nation is carried up into heaven, and the problem which the test involved is solved by the use of the reasoning mind.
So think of your nation.
Taurus carries the test into the emotional or astral plane and carries desire sensitivity up from the form side of life into that world of sensitive perception, which we call the intuitional plane. The lesson of desire. Secondly, the tests connected with desire and the astral plane. These are subtler in nature, producing automatic effects upon the physical plane. They are not inherent in the animal nature, but are imposed by the desire nature and are again 3 in number: fear, hatred, and ambition or desire for power.
Again, think of your nation. Has that nation learned the lesson of desire?
How might we apply the lesson of self-will? Carries the test into the region of the mental processes, which is the reflection of the will aspect of divinity. The problem is voiced by Christ in the words, "Father, not my will, but thine be done." The tests carry the self-will of the personality up into the region of the divine will, and the result is inspiration and the emergence of a world savior.
Is there any evidence that the nation under consideration is beginning to express selfless, utterly selfless will outside of its own personality, national will. What evidence is there? Is there a nation that has made considerable progress in this regard as a nation? In looking at the country of Switzerland, I was immediately aware that I couldn't go forward without considering Geneva, the planetary inlet, the heart center. So if you are considering the United States, you may be considering the throat center. If you're considering the United Kingdom, all of the nations under that commonwealth that DK gives the planetary head through London. Andrea, would you read this for us, please? Heike, would you read this for us, please?
The force which the center at Geneva is expressing at present ineffectually, though later a change will come, is that of the second ray of love and wisdom, which with its major emphasis at this time upon the quality of inclusiveness. It is concerned with the binding together in brotherly love, and with the expression of the nature of service. This planetary center, which conditions the little country of Switzerland, has had a most potent effect upon that country, and a study of these effects will demonstrate future possibility for the world, once the flow of its energy is less obstructed. It has produced the fusion of three powerful racial types in group formation, and not through admixture as in the United States. It has enabled two relatively antagonistic divisions of the Christian faith to work together with a minimum of friction. It has made Geneva the seat of the Red Cross, that world activity which works truly impartially with and for the nationals of all countries and for the prisoners of all nations. It housed that sad but well-intentioned experiment which was called the League of Nations, and will again, now does, house a more true league to meet the world need. It is that which protected the small country from the aggressive sweep of the Axis powers. The motto or note of this center is, I seek to fuse, to blend, and serve.
And a great hint as to the rays of Switzerland. So what is the impact then? It, humanity, is in reality the brain of the planetary deity, its many units being analogous to the brain cells in the human apparatus. So when we think of Geneva, there's a concentration in the brain of humanity immediately in that area for the heart center. And I would suspect there are members of the hierarchy who may externalize in that area, where they are those who have achieved peace and quiescence and can be impressed. Aspirants and disciples represent those brain cells which are beginning to fall into the larger divine rhythm. They are learning the nature of responsiveness. The mass of humanity are like the millions of unused brain cells, which the psychologists and scientists tell us we possess, but do not employ. So when DK tells us to think the teachings into the minds of men and women everywhere, we are, from a point of peace and quiescence, meditating into those brain cells which need to be awakened and can respond. So our meditations on a nation accomplish this. And that ordered purpose can become known in each of the planetary centers. And the hierarchical relationship that is found to Geneva does involve the Buddhic and intuitional plane as ordered purpose, relates to the fourth initiation for those involved, and does concern the throat center, humanity, and light upon the path. So I'm going to go through very quickly, and we'll pause and stop this particular session and give each of us this challenge to consider the nation in relation to the first relation, the second, the third, and the fourth, and share any thoughts you have in writing or record it, and I will receive those and put those into a synthesis from this group work. And we'll close today with the last sermon of Buddha. For as we approach the Gemini full moon on each of the preparatory days in the 7-day ritual, the first day, the keynote of love, emphasizing the first stanza. The second day, the key of resurrection, emphasizing the second stanza. And the third day, the keynote of contact, the third stanza. And as you consider your nation, consider the cry of humanity within that nation, sounding that particular sentence or statement from the Buddha in relation to the physical body of that nation. Is it the first, the third, the seventh? The astral body of the nation, is it the first, the second, the fourth, the sixth? The mental body of the nation, the first, the third, the fourth, the fifth? And you're not limited to those that are those that are suggested. And try to integrate in your pondering, in your contemplation, how the cries are being heard. Think of the physical body of that nation and the keynote of love. Herein, O Ananda, let a brother or sister nation, as humanity dwells in the body of that nation, so regard the body, that all the brothers and sisters, being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, may, whilst in the world, overcome the grief that arises from the body's cravings. May the disciples and initiates within the nation lift the body of that nation, being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, to overcome the grief which arises from that nation's etheric physical cravings on the keynote of love. While subject to sensations, let the nation continue so to regard the sensations that the body of the nations, the astral body of the nation, experiences. And being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, using the pure reason of the mind, whilst in the world, overcome the grief which arises from these sensations, these glamours, these feelings coming through the astral body. And aspirants and disciples being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, assist in the clearing of glamours of that nation to overcome the grief that arises from these sensations. And may the nation experience a resurrection from control of the astral field. And now attuning to the mental body of that nation on the keynote of contact, that we may truly contact the mental body of that nation, whatever ray it is on and expressing, so that all aspirants and disciples thinking, reasoning, feeling, so regard thought, that thought, being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, so that as we are in the world, we can assist in overcoming the grief that arises from the craving due to ideas or to reasoning or to the feeling thinking of those ideas, causing the grief. That as aspirants and disciples, we are strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful. And in meditation, we contact the mind of that nation. We infuse that mind with soul consciousness and eradicate the grief that has arisen due to those national ideas and the cravings created, due to the improper reasoning and the feeling thinking that dominates that national mind. And the Buddha goes on to say, those who either now or after I am dead shall be a lamp unto themselves. May these nations be lamps unto themselves and live the spiritual motto they are to live, relying upon themselves only and not relying upon any external help, but holding fast to the truth as their lamp and seeking their salvation in the truth alone. Shall not look for assistance to anyone besides themselves. It is they, among the advancing nations, who shall reach the very topmost height, but they must be anxious to learn. The Buddha says, and the Christ will sound this sermon. My age is now full ripe. My current incarnation draws to its close. I leave you, I depart, relying on myself alone, returning once a year at the Taurus full moon for 8 minutes. Be earnest then, O brethren, holy, full of thought. Be steadfast in resolve. Keep watch o'er your own hearts. Who wearies not, but holds fast to his truth and law, shall cross the sea of life, shall make an end of grief. When the light of Gnosis has dispelled the darkness of ignorance, when all existences have been seen as without substance, peace ensues when life draws to an end, which seems to cure along sickness at last. Everything, either stationary or movable, is bound to perish in the end. Be you therefore mindful and vigilant. The time for my entry, the Buddha's entry, into nirvana has now arrived. There are my last words. So we look forward to the Gemini full moon and the days before the full moon, the keynote of love, the keynote of resurrection, the keynote of contact, that we may attune to the Christ in the sounding of this last sermon at the time, the exact moment of the full moon. As we approach 2025 and hierarchy's decision under the master of all masters, the Christ, as to when the hierarchy will begin its externalization. From the point of light within the mind of God, Let light stream forth into human minds. Let light descend on you. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into human hearts. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide all human wills, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the human race, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Om. 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 Frida, could you do this for us, please?
I will try. My voice is not good. May the holy ones whose disciple I am show me the light I seek. Give me the strong aid of their compassion and their wisdom. There is a peace which passeth understanding. It abides in the hearts of those who live in the eternal. There is a power which maketh all things new. It lives and moves in those who know the self as one. May that peace brood over us, that power uplift us till we stand where the one initiator is invoked, till we see his star shine forth.
Thank you, and thank all of you. We'll meet again in an informal manner next Saturday to conclude this section, and then prepare a more formal, more timely version for posting on YouTube. Including in next month, we'll continue, or next Saturday, with this 8-point list that is given in relation to the 8 main points of the last sermon of the Buddha.